Hello, my name is Cormac, and I'm 30 years old. I am a software engineer, born and raised in a peaceful small town called Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Here the streets are shaded by ancient oak trees, white wooden houses nestle along the tranquil Susquehanna River, and endless cornfields stretch beneath a deep blue sky. Lewisburg is as beautiful as a painting, but for me, it was once a prison, where my childhood memories were stained by harsh words and wounds that never healed. I don't know where to begin this story. Perhaps it starts in my early years, when the world seemed both vast and terrifying through my young eyes. My mother, whom I only know through fragmented stories and a few faded photographs, left this world when I was just 2 years old. I can't recall her face or the warmth of her embrace, only a cold void in my heart where her love should have been. My father, Edmund, a middle-class businessman with a perpetually stern demeanor, never filled that void. Instead, he left me with different scars. Scars from his indifference and cruel words that I could never understand why I deserved. I grew up in a large house at the end of St. Catherine Street, its polished exterior hiding dark secrets. My father married my stepmother, Sandra, just a year after my mother's passing. Sandra had a sweet smile in front of others, but behind closed doors, she was a storm. To me, she was the embodiment of cruelty. Ungrateful brat, she would snap whenever I spilled a glass of water or forgot to wipe my shoes before entering the house. Freeloader, she called me even when I was just an 8-year-old child scrambling to do everything to please her. But it was never enough. My father was different. He didn't hit me or yell at me like Sandra did. He just didn't care. To him, I was like a shadow, something superfluous in his home. Bastard, he once blurted out in a fit of anger. That word became a blade, cutting into me every time I looked into his eyes. I didn't understand why. I didn't know what I had done to make him hate me so much. All I knew was that in that house I didn't belong anywhere. Then there was Dylan, my half-brother, the son of my father and Sandra. Dylan was the light in their eyes. He was spoiled from a young age, always given new toys, nice clothes, and the kind of affection I could only dream of. Dylan's birthdays were grand celebrations filled with cake, balloons, and laughter that echoed through the house. My birthdays? Not a single gift, not a single word of congratulations. My father never attended my parent-teacher meetings or asked about my studies. All his attention was reserved for Dylan, as if I were a mistake meant to be forgotten. I remember one incident when I was 10 years old. I accidentally broke Sandra's favorite vase, a genuine accident, while I was trying to dust it as she had asked. Sandra screamed, calling me a destructive little monster, and slapped me so hard I fell to the floor. Dylan stood there watching with a gleeful smirk, while my father just shook his head and turned away as if he saw nothing. That night I curled up in my room, hugging my knees, wondering why I was treated this way. Why didn't my father ever protect me? Why did my mother leave me behind? Days like that weren't rare. Sandra found every excuse to punish me for the smallest mistakes, especially when they involved Dylan. If Dylan spilled milk, I was scolded for not watching him carefully. If Dylan got his homework wrong, I was blamed for not helping him. Everything in that house revolved around Dylan, while I was just a shadow, an unwanted presence, a person unloved. But there was one place where I felt I truly existed: my grandmother Agnes's small farm on the outskirts of Lewisburg. The farm wasn't anything special. A rickety wooden house, a modest garden with a few rows of vegetables, and a shabby chicken coop. But to me it was paradise. Agnes was the only person who looked at me with warmth, as if I were her entire world. Every weekend when my father and Sandra were busy with parties or work, I was sent to her place. And there, I could live. Agnes always greeted me with a tight hug, the faint scent of freshly baked cookies clinging to her clothes. She cooked me simple but loving meals: pumpkin soup, toasted bread, and sometimes a slice of warm apple pie. She asked me about school, about what I liked, about my dreams. She listened, truly listened, as if every word I said mattered. To her, I wasn't a bastard or a freeloader. To her, I was just Cormac, the grandson she loved. When I was 12, sitting on her porch watching the chickens peck at the ground, I mustered the courage to ask about my mother, the woman I only knew through old photos. "Grandma, what was my mom like?" I asked, my voice trembling. Agnes stopped knitting, her eyes clouding as if she were looking into a distant place. She told me about my mother, Rosemary, a beautiful woman with golden hair and a radiant smile. "Your mother was strong," she said, "but she carried sorrows in her heart that I could never soothe." I wanted to ask more, to know why my mother left, but Agnes just shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "Some things are too painful, Cormac. You'll understand when you're older." I didn't understand. How could a 12-year-old understand? But I saw that every mention of my mother was like a knife to Agnes's heart. I didn't want to make her sad, so I stopped asking. I just held her hand, feeling the warmth of her frail fingers, and told myself that at least I still had her. My childhood years passed like that, caught between the coldness of the house on St. Catherine Street and the warmth of Agnes's farm. I learned to survive, to hide my tears, to please Sandra, to avoid her punishments, and to stop expecting any love from my father. But deep inside, I carried a silent question. Why? Why did my father hate me? Why did my mother leave me? And why did I have to live in a world full of lies where I never felt I belonged? Those questions grew with me over the years like a smoldering fire in my chest. I didn't know that when I turned 18, all the dark secrets of my family would come to light, and my life would change forever. 18 years old. The age people say is the threshold of freedom, of big dreams and new beginnings. For me, it was the year I stood at the edge of an abyss where everything I had once believed was torn apart, leaving a painful yet awakening void. I still remember that day vividly, my 18th birthday, when Grandma Agnes called me to her farm. There was no cake, no balloons, no joyful congratulations like Dylan's lavish parties. But I didn't expect anything from my father or Sandra. To me, being with Grandma eating a meal she cooked was already the greatest gift. I pedaled my bike along the familiar dirt paths to the farm, the cool autumn breeze carrying the scent of hay and the earthy air of Lewisburg. Inside, I felt a mix of excitement and unease. The night before, Agnes had called, her voice trembling over the phone, unlike her usual warmth. "Cormac, come see me tomorrow. There's something I need to tell you." I didn't ask much, just nodded through the phone, but a gut feeling told me something significant was waiting. When I arrived, Agnes was sitting in her old armchair by the fireplace, her frail hands clutching a small wooden box. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. I stood frozen at the threshold, my heart pounding. "Grandma, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice slightly shaky. She looked up, giving me a sad smile, and motioned for me to sit beside her. "Cormac, today you turn 18. You're no longer a child. It's time I told you the truth." The truth. That word echoed in my mind, sharp as a blade. I had lived my entire life surrounded by lies, Sandra's harsh words, my father's indifference, the evasive answers whenever I asked about my mother, but I had never dared to imagine that the truth could be so painful. Agnes opened the wooden box and pulled out an old photograph, its edges yellowed and worn. In it was a young woman, beautiful like a rose, her golden hair shimmering in the sunlight, her radiant smile tinged with a hint of sadness in her eyes. Beside her was a man I didn't recognize, tall, with dark, tousled hair and gentle eyes. "This is your mother, Rosemary," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "And this is your real father, Caleb." I felt the blood in my veins stop flowing. My real father? I stared at the photo, searching for any trace of myself in that man's face, but all I saw was a stranger. A story I had never been told. "Grandma, what do you mean?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "My father isn't Edmund?" Agnes took my hand, her trembling fingers warm against mine. "I'm sorry, Cormac. I've kept this secret for too long, thinking it was the best way to protect you. But you deserve to know the truth." And then, Like a flood, she told me everything. My mother, Rosemary, had loved Caleb, a poor man who worked at a lumber mill near town. Caleb had nothing but a sincere heart and a fierce love for her. They were deeply in love despite Agnes's disapproval. "I was wrong," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought Caleb wasn't good enough for Rosemary, that he couldn't give her a stable future. I forced her to leave Caleb and marry Edmund, a man with money and status. I thought it was the best thing for my daughter. But she had been wrong. My mother couldn't love Edmund." Agnes recounted how my mother lived in that house like a shadow, sinking deeper into loneliness and depression with each passing day. Edmund knew she was pregnant with me, knew I wasn't his child, but he married her anyway. Perhaps out of pride for his reputation, or maybe because he loved her. Whatever the reason, the truth was that he never saw me as his son. Agnes went on to reveal that my mother, unable to bear the suffocating weight of that marriage, took her own life with pills when I was only 2 years old. "I killed my own daughter," Agnes sobbed. "And I let you grow up in hell. I'm so sorry, Cormac. I'm so sorry." I sat there, silent, feeling as though the world was crumbling beneath me. The scattered pieces of my childhood suddenly snapped into place, sharp and heartbreaking. Edmund's coldness, his refusal to call me son, now made sense. His words, "bastard," weren't just a burst of anger, they were the truth he had always known. Sandra, with her cruelty, likely knew as well, which explained why she treated me like an unwanted burden. Everything I had questioned, everything that had caused me pain, now had an answer. But that answer didn't soothe me. It only shattered my heart. "I know how you've lived in that house," Agnes continued, her voice growing faint. "I know how Sandra treated you, how Edmund never saw you as his son. But I couldn't do anything. I'm just a poor old woman, Cormac. I was afraid that if I took you in, I couldn't give you a good life. I hoped that there at least you'd have a brighter future." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to blame her for letting me grow up in that cruelty. But looking into her red, tear-filled eyes, seeing the deep lines etched into her face, all I saw was her pain. She had lost her daughter, and now she was losing me to her own guilt. I grabbed her hand, squeezing it tightly as if to tell her I didn't blame her. But I couldn't speak. In my mind, there was only the image of my mother, a woman I had never known who chose to leave this world to escape her pain. I don't know how long I sat there, only that when I left the farm, the sky was pitch black. I rode my bike home, but it felt like I was floating like a lost soul. The photo of my mother and Caleb rested in my jacket pocket, heavy like a reminder of the truth I had just learned. I was no longer the Cormac of yesterday. I was the son of Rosemary and Caleb, not Edmund. I was the product of a forbidden love, a tragedy I had paid for with my entire childhood. In the days that followed, I lived like a shell of myself. I still went to school, did chores around the house, and endured Sandra's verbal lashings. But inside, the smoldering fire that had burned quietly for years now roared into a blaze. I no longer wanted to please them. I no longer wanted to live behind the curtain of lies they had woven. I began planning to leave that house, to leave Lewisburg, to leave everything that had imprisoned me. One evening, as I was packing my books to prepare for final exams, Sandra stormed into my room, a sneer on her lips. "You think you're going to college, huh?" she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "You should be grateful you're even allowed to stay in this house, and don't expect us to pay for your tuition." I looked straight into her eyes for the first time, not lowering my gaze. "I'm leaving this house," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "And I'm never coming back." She burst out laughing as if my words were a joke, but I didn't care. In my heart, I had made my decision. The truth Agnes revealed didn't just hurt me, it gave me strength. I was no longer the bastard or the freeloader. I was Cormac, the son of Rosemary, who loved and sacrificed for that love. And I would live not to prove anything to Edmund or Sandra, but to prove it to myself, to my mother, and to Agnes. The day I left that nightmare of a house, I took nothing but an old backpack and the photo of my mother and Caleb. I didn't look back, didn't say goodbye. I just walked away, carrying the fire in my heart, ready to face a future I knew wouldn't be easy, but at least it would be mine. Lewisburg faded behind me as the bus rolled forward, carrying me away from that small town. I sat by the window watching the cornfields slip by, my heart heavy yet strangely light. 18 years of enduring Edmund's coldness, Sandra's cruelty, and Dylan's smug glances had left deep scars within me. But the truth Grandma Agnes revealed was like a blade, cutting me free from the lies while giving me a chance to start anew. I was no longer the trembling child, desperate to please those who would never love me. I was Cormac, and I would write my own story. I chose a university in Pittsburgh, far enough from Lewisburg to escape my past, but close enough to visit Agnes. Software engineering wasn't a random choice. I had always loved numbers, code, and how they could transform complex ideas into reality. Computers didn't judge, didn't scold, didn't call me bastard. To me, they were a space I could control, a world I could shape. But the path to college was far from easy. Edmund didn't give me a single cent. "You want to go to college? Figure it out yourself," he said, his voice icy when I told him about my acceptance letter. Sandra just smirked, as if the idea of me attending college was a joke. Dylan, 15 at the time, looked at me with a mix of pity and mockery. I didn't respond. I packed a few clothes, a notebook, and my mother's photo and left. I worked every job I could to cover tuition and living expenses. By day I studied, by night I waited tables at a small diner in the student district. On weekends I took on delivery jobs or fixed classmates' computers. Some nights I slept only 3 hours, my eyes burning from staring at screens too long, but I never gave up. Whenever exhaustion hit, I pulled out my mother's photo, gazed at her sad smile, and urged myself to keep going. Agnes was my only light during those years. She sent me handwritten letters on cream-colored paper, yellowed with age, her shaky handwriting filled with love. "You're my pride, Cormac," she wrote in one letter. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." Each letter came with a small gift, sometimes a cookie she baked, carefully wrapped in foil. Other times a pair of hand-knitted mittens to keep me warm in Pittsburgh's winters. Those gifts held little material value, but to me, they were everything. They reminded me that no matter how harsh life was, I had someone who believed in me and loved me unconditionally. The college years were a battle. I fought not only with coursework and long work shifts, but also with myself. Some days I sat alone in my cramped apartment, listening to the rain outside, feeling loneliness threaten to swallow me whole. Memories of my childhood, Sandra's beatings, Edmund's indifference, Dylan's smug looks, haunted me like ghosts that never left. But whenever I felt like giving up, I thought of my mother, of Caleb, of their forbidden love story. I told myself I wasn't just living for me, but to carry on their story, to prove I was worthy of the love my mother gave me, even if only for 2 short years. I graduated with honors, an achievement I could hardly believe myself. On graduation day, I stood among the crowd of students and their families, watching parents hug their children, beaming with pride. I had no one by my side, but I didn't feel sad. In my pocket was Agnes's latest letter, which read, "I knew you'd do it, Cormac. Your mother would be proud of you too." I smiled, clutching the letter, and walked out of the auditorium with a sense of relief. I had done it, not because of Edmund or Sandra, but because of me. After graduation, I landed a job offer from a major tech company in Pittsburgh. The starting salary was enough to rent a small, clean apartment with a window overlooking the Allegheny River. For the first time in my life, I had a place to call home, a place free of Sandra's screams, Edmund's coldness, and Dylan's smug glances. I bought a small bed, an old desk, and hung the photo of my mother and Caleb on the wall. Every morning, waking up and seeing that photo felt like my mother was there, smiling at me. I started saving every penny, dreaming of one day buying a house where I could bring Agnes to live with me. She was still at her old farm, still sending me letters regularly, but I knew her health was fading. Each time we spoke on the phone, her voice grew weaker, though she always tried to sound cheerful. "I'm fine, Cormac," she'd say. "Just take care of yourself. I only want to see you happy." But I knew I couldn't be truly happy without her by my side. She was the only one who had given me unconditional love, and I wanted to give her a peaceful, comfortable life in her final years. My early years working in Pittsburgh weren't always smooth. The pressure of work, late nights finishing projects, and occasional waves of loneliness still hit me. But I had learned to face it. I found joy in small things: a hot cup of coffee in the morning, an evening coding by the window, or rereading Agnes's letters when I missed her. I also began to open up, making friends with a few colleagues who knew nothing of my past but treated me with respect and kindness. At a company party once, a colleague asked about my family. "What's your family like, Cormac? Are they proud of you?" I smiled, took a sip of beer, and replied, "I only have my grandmother, and she's the proudest." I didn't mention Edmund, Sandra, or Dylan. They were no longer part of my life. I had cut the ties binding me to them, not with hatred, but with resilience. I didn't need them to define me. I had found my worth not through blood, but through what I had overcome. But life, as I had learned, is never a straight line. Just when I thought I had found peace, another event was waiting, ready to upend everything I had built. It was the day I met Diana, the woman who would change my life, and the day the secrets of my past would return, threatening to destroy it all. I met Diana on a rainy afternoon in Pittsburgh, in a small coffee shop near my office. I was sitting in my usual corner, clutching a cold cup of coffee, eyes glued to my laptop screen as I tried to debug a stubborn piece of code. Rain pattered against the window, and as usual, I was lost in my own world. That is, until she walked in. Diana wasn't the kind of person who commanded the attention of an entire room. She wasn't flashy or ostentatious, but there was something about her that made it impossible for me to look away. Maybe it was the way she moved, light but confident, or the way she smiled at the barista when ordering a latte. She wore a sea blue sweater, her brown hair loosely tied back, a few wet strands clinging to her forehead from the rain outside. I don't know why, but in that moment I felt a strange warmth, as if someone had lit up a dark corner of my heart. She sat at the table across from me, opened a book, and started reading, oblivious to her surroundings. I tried to focus on my code, but every few minutes my eyes drifted to her. Finally, summoning a courage I didn't know I had, I stood up and approached her. "Hi," I said, my voice a bit awkward. "Is that book any good? You seem really into it." She looked up, her eyes surprised but friendly. "Yeah, it's pretty great," she replied with a gentle smile. "Do you like to read?" That's how it all began. A simple question, a random conversation, but it opened a new chapter in my life. I quickly learned that Diana was a freelance journalist working for a local paper. She was sharp, intelligent, but also kind and sincere in a way that was hard to describe. She had a way of listening that made me want to open up, to tell her everything, from my dreams to the grueling college years and even the scars left by my childhood. But I wasn't ready yet. My past was still a locked door, and I was afraid that if I opened it, she'd see me as weak, unworthy. Our meetings after that came naturally. We met at the coffee shop, took walks along the Allegheny River, or simply hung out in my small apartment, eating pizza and watching old movies. Diana had a way of making me laugh, truly laugh, something I rarely did since leaving Lewisburg. She told me about the articles she wrote, about interviewing strangers and uncovering their stories. "Everyone has a story, Cormac," she once said, "and I believe yours is worth telling." I didn't know how right she was, but I knew she was becoming an indispensable part of my life. For the first time, I felt I wasn't just living to survive, but to enjoy. Evenings with Diana, her gentle hand-holding, the times she rested her head on my shoulder while we sat on a park bench. All of it made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be loved. After a year of knowing each other, I decided to tell Diana about my past. It was a winter evening, and we were sitting in my apartment, the fireplace crackling softly. I took out the photo of my mother and Caleb, placed it on the table, and told her everything. About my painful childhood, Sandra's cruelty, Edmund's coldness, and the heartbreaking truth about my mother. I spoke of Agnes, her letters, and how I fought to become who I was today. When I finished, my eyes stung, but I held back tears. I was afraid she'd see me differently, as a weak, scarred person. But Diana just took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "You're not your past, Cormac," she said firmly. "You're the person who overcame it, and I love you for that." For the first time in my life, I cried in front of someone else, not out of pain, but because I felt accepted, loved, not for who I was in others' eyes, but for who I truly was. After 2 years together, I knew I wanted to be with Diana forever. I wasn't a romantic, but I wanted to do something special. I saved up to buy a simple ring, a small, sparkling stone set in silver. I took her to the Allegheny River at sunset, where the golden light danced on the water. My hands trembling, I knelt down and asked, "Diana, will you write the rest of this story with me?" She laughed, tears in her eyes, and nodded. "Yes, Cormac, I will." We began planning a small, intimate wedding. I wanted Agnes there to witness the day I built a family of my own. I called her, telling her about Diana and our plans. "I'll be there, Cormac," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I wouldn't miss your big day for anything." I also decided to invite Edmund, Sandra, and Dylan. Not because I wanted them there, but because I wanted to prove I had moved beyond them, that I had built a life they couldn't destroy. But I never expected that on my wedding day the past would return, sharper and more ruthless than ever. My wedding day with Diana took place on a crisp autumn afternoon in Pittsburgh, when the oak leaves blazed golden and the air carried the faint scent of hay. We chose a small riverside restaurant along the Allegheny for the ceremony, its wooden tables adorned with wildflowers and flickering candles. Diana was radiant in a simple wedding dress, her brown hair cascading loosely, accented by a delicate flower crown. I stood beside her in a navy suit I'd saved up for months to buy, my heart pounding with happiness and a touch of nerves. Grandma Agnes sat in the front row, her eyes glistening with tears, her smile the most precious thing to me. I held Diana's hand, feeling the warmth of her palm, and thought that perhaps for the first time in my life I truly felt I belonged somewhere. The ceremony went smoothly, filled with heartfelt blessings from friends and soft music from a piano. When it was time for speeches, I stood up, thanking everyone for coming, thanking Diana for loving me, and thanking Agnes for being my guiding light through my darkest years. The guests clapped, some wiping tears, and I thought, maybe this would be a perfect day. Until the MC invited the father of the groom to speak. Edmund rose from his table, his demeanor as stern as ever, but with a cold, razor-sharp smile on his lips. A chill ran down my spine, though I didn't know why. Sandra sat beside him, her lips pursed, her eyes piercing. Dylan, now a 20-year-old man, looked at me with an unreadable expression, but I caught a fleeting glint of smugness in his eyes. The room fell silent, waiting. Edmund stepped up to the podium, took the microphone, and began speaking, his voice slow and deliberate. "Today is a special day," he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "But I'm afraid I have no congratulations to offer." He paused, his smile growing colder. "I have no wedding gift, no words of blessing. Why? Because Cormac is not my son. He's a bastard." The room seemed to stop breathing. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice, as if someone had dumped a bucket of cold water over my head. Diana, standing beside me, gripped my hand tightly, her face pale. Agnes, in the front row, looked at me with wide, pained eyes. Whispers began to ripple through the guests, their curious, pitying, and confused gazes fixed on me. I wanted to say something, to fight back, but my throat felt strangled. The old scars, the words "bastard" I thought I'd buried, came rushing back sharper than ever. Sandra and Dylan sat there, their lips curling into discreet smiles as if they'd been waiting for this moment. I looked at them, and for a second I saw the 10-year-old boy again, curled up in a corner, enduring Sandra's verbal assaults and beatings. I thought I'd overcome it all, but now, standing in the middle of my wedding, I felt like my world was crumbling. Then, like a bolt of light piercing the darkness, Agnes stood up. She walked to the stage, slow but resolute, clutching an old cloth bag. All eyes turned to her, but she looked only at Edmund. "If you want to speak the truth," she said, her voice trembling yet powerful, "then I have another truth to share." The room fell deathly silent. I stared at her, my heart racing, unsure of what was happening. Agnes opened her bag, pulled out a stack of documents, and placed them on the table. "I've kept this secret for too long," she said, her eyes sweeping over Sandra and Dylan. "But today, for my grandson, for Cormac, I will not stay silent." She held up a sheet of paper, her voice ringing clear. "This is the result of a DNA test conducted 3 years ago. It proves that Dylan, whom you, Edmund, have always treated as your own son, is not your child." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Sandra shot to her feet, her face ashen, but Agnes didn't stop. "Dylan is the son of Sandra and her former lover, a man she was involved with for years, even after marrying you, Edmund." Edmund froze, the microphone slipping from his hand, clattering loudly to the floor. Sandra screamed, "You're lying! You're making this up!" But Agnes only smiled, a sad, steely smile. She pulled out a stack of photos from her bag, images of Sandra with a stranger captured in intimate moments in places Edmund never knew about. She went on to present evidence of Sandra's spending on her lover, receipts and records that laid bare a decades-long affair. "You two treated Cormac like garbage," Agnes said, her voice now thick with anger. "You called him a bastard, but you're the ones living in lies. Edmund, you raised a child who isn't yours and turned your back on Cormac, an innocent boy. Sandra, you deceived your husband, deceived the world, and left scars in my grandson's heart that will never heal." The room erupted in whispers. Edmund staggered, clutching his chest, his face pale. "No, it can't be," he muttered, then suddenly collapsed unconscious. Guests panicked, some rushing to call an ambulance. Sandra stood frozen, her face white as paper, her lips trembling, unable to speak. Dylan, his head bowed, shoulders shaking, quietly stood, pulled his mother by the arm, and left the room. They didn't look back, but I knew the weight of the guests' stares bore down on them, just as I had once endured. I stood there, still clutching Diana's hand, feeling like I was caught in a storm. I didn't know what to say or how to feel, angry, relieved, or in pain. I had known the truth about not being Edmund's son, but Agnes's sudden revelation that Dylan wasn't his either stunned me. For decades, how had Edmund not known? And how had my grandmother, a quiet old woman living in the countryside, managed to uncover this truth? The hall buzzed with whispers. Confused and curious eyes fixed on the stage where Grandma Agnes stood, small but resolute. The ambulance had arrived, whisking Edmund away in the chaos, while Sandra and Dylan had quietly slipped out of the reception, their heads bowed as if fleeing the scornful gazes of the guests. But I no longer cared about them. My focus was on Agnes, the woman who had spent her life loving and protecting me, even at the cost of her own silent pain. She stepped down from the stage, her frail hands still clutching the old cloth bag. She approached Diana and me, her eyes gentle yet burning with an unquenchable fire. "Cormac," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I'm sorry for disrupting your special day, but I couldn't let them keep hurting you." I wanted to say something, to thank her, to ask how she had gathered that evidence, but my throat was tight. I could only squeeze her hand, feeling the tremor in her thin fingers, and realize she had done it all for me. The MC, after a moment of awkwardness, tried to regain control of the event. "Let's, continue with the speeches," he said, his voice slightly shaky. "Mrs. Agnes, would you like to say anything else?" She looked at me, then at Diana, a gentle smile returning to her lips. "Yes," she said, stepping back to the podium. "I'd like to say a few words, not just to Cormac and Diana, but to everyone here." The hall fell silent again, all eyes on her. I held Diana's hand tighter, my heart pounding, unsure of what she would say next. But when she began, her voice rang out, clear and full of emotion. like a ballad about what I had endured, what she had witnessed, and the love she had for me. "Cormac is my grandson," she began, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "But more than that, he is the greatest pride of my life. I've watched him grow up in a house without love, where he was treated as an outsider, called names no child should ever hear. I've seen him endure beatings and insults, but never once did I see him give up. My Cormac is strong, not because he was born that way, but because he chose to stand up, no matter how hard life tried to knock him down." Tears stung my eyes, but I fought them back. Diana squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening too. Agnes continued, her voice rising and falling like a fairy tale, but raw with pain and truth. "When Cormac was little, he'd come to my farm, curled up in the corner of the kitchen, his eyes full of hurt. He asked me about his mother, Rosemary, and I didn't have the courage to tell him the whole truth. But I promised myself that one day I would, and I would do everything to protect him." She paused, taking a deep breath, then looked directly at me. "Cormac, you're not just my grandson. You're the reason I keep living, keep hoping. You've overcome everything, not to prove anything to those who hurt you, but to prove it to yourself. And today, standing here, seeing you with Diana, I know you found the happiness you deserve." The guests began to clap softly at first, then louder, like a wave of emotion. I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down my face. Diana hugged me, whispering in my ear, "See, Cormac, you're never alone." I nodded, unable to speak, knowing that this moment, despite being shaken by painful truths, was one of the most beautiful in my life. Agnes raised her hand, signaling for silence. "I have one more thing to say," she continued, her voice now soft but laden with meaning. "Today, I want to give Cormac and Diana a wedding gift. Not to make up for what you've lost, but to honor what you've achieved." She pulled a set of documents from her bag, holding them up for all to see. "These are the deeds to my house in Lewisburg, along with all my savings. I want Cormac and Diana to have a fresh start, a real home where they can build a family of their own." The hall erupted in applause. I stood frozen, unable to believe my ears. The house in Lewisburg, the small farm where I'd found solace, where I'd sat with Agnes and dreamed of a better future, was now mine and Diana's. I stepped onto the stage, wrapping my arms around her, tears falling uncontrollably. "Grandma, I don't need anything," I whispered. "I just need you." She stroked my hair as she did when I was a boy and said, "You've already given me everything, Cormac. Now let me do this for you." The reception continued in a warm, heartfelt atmosphere. The guests, after the initial shock, began sharing stories and offering blessings. Diana and I cut the wedding cake and shared our first dance under the flickering candlelight. I looked into her eyes, seeing the glow of love and hope, and knew that no matter how painful my past was, I had found a new family, a real one. But in my heart, questions about Agnes lingered. How had she obtained that evidence? How had an elderly woman living quietly on a farm uncovered a secret Sandra had hidden for decades? I resolved to ask her later, but for now I wanted to savor the joy, the love of Diana, and the presence of Agnes. The wedding ended in a warm atmosphere, as if the storm that had just passed was merely a fleeting dream. Grandma Agnes stayed in Pittsburgh for a few days at Diana's and my invitation. We brought her to our small apartment where I had prepared a cozy room for her. Watching her step inside, gently touching the framed photo of my mother on the wall, I felt a wave of warmth flood my heart. For the first time, I had a true home, not just for Diana and me, but for Agnes, the woman who had sacrificed her life to love me. In the days following the wedding, Diana and I began planning our future. Agnes's gift, the house in Lewisburg, and her savings was a starting point I had never dared to dream of. But I knew I didn't want to keep the house just for memories. The small farm in Lewisburg had been my sanctuary, but it was also tied to painful memories of a childhood marked by rejection. After discussing with Diana, we decided to sell the house and use the money to buy a new one in Pittsburgh, a place where we could create new memories untainted by the past. Selling the house wasn't easy. I returned to Louisburg one last time, stepping into Agnes's farm, where everything remained as it was in my memories. The faint smell of cookies, the clucking of chickens in the yard, the old armchair by the fireplace. I walked through each room, touching the items Agnes had used, feeling an indescribable sadness. This was where I had once curled up beside her, seeking warmth in the coldest of days. But now, I knew I needed to let go, not to forget, but to move forward. I found a buyer, a young family with 2 small children eager to leave the city for a quiet rural life. They loved the farm, the small garden, and the rickety chicken coop. As I handed them the keys, I smiled, feeling a sense of relief. I knew Agnes would support this decision. She always wanted my happiness, and my happiness now lay in Pittsburgh with Diana and her. With the money from the sale and Agnes's savings, Diana and I bought a small 2-story house in the Pittsburgh suburbs. It had a white picket fence, a little backyard garden, and a porch overlooking a tree-lined street. Moving in felt like starting a new chapter, one free of Sandra's verbal lashings and Edmund's coldness, filled only with love and hope. We convinced Agnes to live with us. At first, she resisted, saying she didn't want to intrude on our young marriage. "I'm old, Cormac," she said gently but firmly. "You and Diana need your own space." But Diana and I wouldn't hear it. "You're our family," Diana said, taking her hand. "We want you here to share these days with us." Finally, she agreed, and I'll never forget the radiant smile on her face as she stepped into our new home, where we had set up a cozy room for her with her favorite armchair and a small bookshelf filled with the books she loved. Agnes quickly settled into our new life. She loved sitting on the porch, knitting or reading, while Diana and I prepared dinner in the kitchen. Some evenings, the 3 of us sat around the dining table, laughing and sharing stories. Diana would tease Agnes about her youthful adventures while I just listened, my heart full. This was the family I had always dreamed of, not defined by blood but by love and connection. One evening, after Diana had gone to bed, I sat with Agnes in the living room by the crackling fireplace. The question I had held back since the wedding finally spilled out. "Grandma," I said hesitantly, "how did you know about Sandra's secret? How did you get that evidence?" She looked at me, her eyes twinkling in the firelight, and smiled, a smile both sad and meaningful. "You want to know?" she said softly. "It started a few years ago when I saw Sandra at a small diner outside town. I was there to meet an old friend, and then I saw her sitting in a corner, cozy with a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, holding hands, acting like no one in the world knew who they were. I'd suspected something for a long time, Cormac. Sandra was always deceitful, and the way she treated you only made me more certain she was hiding something." I listened, my heart pounding. Her voice grew quieter, as if unearthing a long-buried secret. I couldn't investigate on my own, so I asked an old friend, Henry, a retired private investigator who owed me a favor from years ago. He agreed to help. He followed Sandra, dug into the man's identity, and uncovered the truth. That Dylan wasn't Edmund's son. That Sandra had been deceiving Edmund for years. Henry gathered photos, copies of messages, and even a DNA test result from a sample he obtained from Dylan. I kept it all in that cloth bag, waiting for the day to reveal the truth. I sat stunned, unable to believe my ears. Agnes, the woman I'd always seen as frail and loving, had been quietly fighting for me like a true warrior. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why wait until my wedding?" She took my hand, her eyes gentle but resolute. "Because I wanted you to live your life, Cormac. I didn't want you consumed by hatred or revenge. But when Edmund stood up and called you a bastard in front of everyone, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I wanted them to know they couldn't hurt you without consequences." I hugged her tightly, tears falling silently. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for always being there for me." She stroked my hair as she had when I was a boy and said, "You're everything to me, Cormac. I'd do anything to protect you." Our life in the new house settled into a rhythm. Diana continued her work at the newspaper while I progressed in my career at the tech company. But what made me happiest were the simple moments with Diana and Agnes. The laughter-filled dinners, the weekend afternoons tending the garden together, or the times Diana and I held hands, sitting with Agnes as she shared stories about my mother and the days they spent together. Though Agnes's health was fading, she remained my inspiration. She taught me that love doesn't need to be grandiose, that true strength lies in perseverance and kindness. And Diana, my perfect partner, stood by me through every joy and sorrow. Together we built a family, not bound by blood but by love, respect, and shared dreams. While I found peace in Pittsburgh, the past in Lewisburg was crumbling. The events of my wedding day weren't just a shock to Diana and me. They were an earthquake, demolishing the false world Edmund, Sandra, and Dylan had built. I didn't seek out news about them. I had resolved to sever all ties with that past. But Lewisburg was a small town, and stories, whether painful or shameful, always found a way to spread. Word of what Grandma Agnes revealed at the wedding swept through the town like wildfire. The people of Lewisburg, accustomed to whispering gossip and trading stories in coffee shops, now had a new topic to dissect. Edmund's family, once seen as a respectable middle-class household, became the center of scorn and pity. Edmund, after suffering a stroke at the wedding, was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. I heard he woke up after a few days, but half his body was paralyzed, his speech impaired, and he was no longer the stern, commanding man he once was. He returned to the grand house on St. Catherine Street, but it was now an empty shell. No more lavish parties, no more handshakes with business associates. I didn't visit him, didn't call, didn't send a single word of concern. It wasn't out of hatred. I had learned to let go of that, but because to him, I had never truly existed. Sandra, the woman who treated me like an unwanted burden, now faced the consequences of her deceit. After the wedding, she became the target of contempt in Lewisburg. Neighbors who once admired her polished exterior now whispered behind her back, calling her the deceiver and the shameless woman. The social clubs she frequented, the afternoon teas she hosted, all vanished. She tried to maintain her pride, but I heard she rarely left the house, its windows always shuttered as if she were hiding from the world's gaze. Dylan, the half-brother I once envied for the affection he received, couldn't escape the fallout either. At 20, he had grown accustomed to being pampered by Edmund and Sandra, seen as the family's heir. But the truth that he wasn't Edmund's biological son shattered everything. I heard Dylan couldn't bear the scrutinizing stares in Lewisburg. He left town shortly after the wedding, with just a suitcase and no goodbyes. A few acquaintances said he moved abroad, possibly to Europe, to start over. But I knew no matter how far he ran, the shame and truth about his origins would follow him like an inescapable shadow. I didn't take joy in their downfall. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. The years of cruel treatment had taught me that hatred only weighs you down. But I couldn't deny a quiet sense of justice deep within. They had lived in lies, hurt me and my mother with their cruelty, and now they were paying the price. Not because of me, not because of Agnes, but because of their own choices. Meanwhile, in Pittsburgh, life with Diana and Agnes flowed on in peace. Agnes, though her health was fading, remained the heart of our family. She loved sitting on the porch, watching Diana and me tend the garden, occasionally sharing stories about my mother. Stories I could now listen to with a lighter heart, no longer haunted by unspoken questions. One evening, as Diana and I prepared dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Mrs. Martha, an old neighbor from Lewisburg who lived near Agnes's farm. She brought a homemade apple pie, saying she wanted to congratulate us. But as we sat down, she shared news about Lewisburg, about how the town was still buzzing with talk of Edmund, Sandra, and Dylan. Edmund lives alone in that big house now, Martha said, her voice tinged with pity. No one visits, no one cares for him. He has a nurse who comes daily, but she says he barely speaks, just sits staring out the window. She paused, studying my reaction. As for Sandra, she's nearly lost her mind. She has no friends left, no one wants to talk to her. I saw her at the grocery store once, but she kept her head down, avoiding everyone's eyes. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to feel pity, but another part recalled the days I cowered in a corner, enduring Sandra's verbal assaults and Edmund's coldness. I stayed silent, gazing out the window at the moonlight illuminating our small garden. I didn't want to think about them anymore, but Martha's story was a reminder that even though I had left Lewisburg behind, the past always found a way to creep into the present. Diana, sitting beside me, placed a hand on my shoulder, as if to remind me I was no longer that wounded boy. "Thank you for sharing," I said to Martha. "But I think for now I just want to focus on my family." Martha smiled and nodded. "You've come a long way, Cormac. Congratulations to you and your little family." She left, leaving the apple pie on the table, and I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because of Edmund, Sandra, or Dylan's story, but because I knew I had chosen a different path, a path of forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. Reflecting on my journey, I realized my life is like a book, with chapters filled with pain and loss, but also brimming with hope and renewal. I was once a boy curled up in a corner, enduring Sandra's harsh words, bearing Edmund's coldness, and wondering why I wasn't loved. I once thought I was a mistake, a bastard who didn't belong anywhere, but now I understand that a person's worth isn't defined by blood, nor by what others think of you, but by how you choose to live, to love, and to rise after every fall. My mother, Rosemary, never had the chance to live the life she deserved. She loved Caleb, my biological father, but was forced into a loveless marriage that led to her tragic death. I used to be angry with her, wondering why she left me in a cruel world, but now I see that she didn't abandon me out of a lack of love. She fought in her own way, and I am the result of that love. A forbidden but genuine love. I carry her spirit and Caleb's within me, and I've chosen to live to honor them, to prove their love wasn't in vain. Grandma Agnes was my guiding light. She gave me not only unconditional love, but also taught me that true strength lies in kindness and perseverance. She quietly fought for me, gathering evidence to expose the truth, not for revenge, but to shield me from lies. She spent her life making up for the mistakes of the past, and I know, though she never said it, she carried the pain of losing my mother. Yet she chose me, chose to love me, and that is the greatest gift I've ever received. Diana, the woman I love, is proof that happiness isn't something you seek, but something you build. She saw me, not as the wounded boy, not as the bastard in Edmund's eyes, but as Cormac, a man with dreams, scars, and a heart ready to love. She taught me that love doesn't need to be perfect, only sincere. Together, we're writing a new story, one not haunted by the past, but shaped by the choices we make today. If I could say something to those who've been hurt, who felt they don't belong, I'd say this: you are not what others say about you. You are not the scars they left behind. You are what you choose to become, through the times you stand up, the times you forgive, and the times you dare to love again. Blood doesn't define family. Love, kindness, and resilience are what create a true home. I don't know what the future holds. There may be difficult days, new challenges, but I know that with Diana by my side, Agnes in my heart, and the strength I've found within myself, I'm ready to face anything. Life isn't a straight line, but every step, whether painful or joyful, is part of a story I'm proud to tell. As the sun sets, I hold Diana's hand, standing with Agnes on the porch. We look out at the garden where wildflowers bloom vibrantly, and I smile. This is my home, this is my family, and this is my story. Imperfect, but filled with love and hope.